Good morning, church. It's lovely to be with you again. It's lovely to be part of our community again and our usual rhythm of Sunday mornings. I've really enjoyed our Sunday services, particularly as a family, sitting together on the couch all together, abiding by my two rules that you must be fully dressed, not including pyjamas, but fully dressed, and you must have had breakfast. It's been lovely to do that together as a family, and it's been really necessary, I think, for a lot of us to continue to meet together, albeit in a very strange way. I've been amazed how much there has been a sense of community, despite looking at each other down cameras and communicating via Facebook, but there really has been a sense that as a church we are still a community, and I know that's been a significant comfort for a lot of people, myself included. Although this whole experience has been a little strange, it's one I'm in the process of reflecting on and doing battle with and trying to make sense of, particularly for me, the camera, which I'm doing right now. Last year when we were planning kind of our launch for this year and the focus we'd have, Sam was talking to me about the fact that it'd be great to make our own emotionally healthy kind of program and to really make our own kind of take on that as a church, and it would be a great idea to record these on video and to have them as a resource for home churches. And I was horrified about that idea secretly for a while, and then finally got around to telling him. The thought of being on camera and having to talk and see my face and knowing it was going out to other people was just too much for me, and I spent most of summer just dreading the timeline and the countdown for when that would need to happen. And the joke is on me. It's one of God's wonderful ways of his sense of humour, and that now I've done my 8th Sunday of Bay Kids. I've done multiple live at lunchtimes through multiple ranges of technological breakdown for Facebook with Bay Kids. I've sat in on Zoom meetings for family and related to church and related to other things, and have felt rather overexposed with how much I have seen of myself, let alone how much others have seen of me. So it has been a learning curve, a steep learning curve for myself. I know that a lot of you have had your own ones, but man, we never knew this is how it was going to go. But I've been so impressed with the way that Sam has pulled all this together, so that really we've kind of kept it seamless and we've been together as a community. So I know a lot of you have been grateful for what Sam and Jen have done and their leadership over this time. Today is a special day, being Mother's Day, and my siblings and I, we're not competitive outright, but there's a little bit of just checking in on each other as to who's done a really great job each Mother's Day. Sometimes it's whether you got in with the first phone call or the first text, or sent a cute photo, or drew a beautiful picture, or got in with the first, taking mum out for lunch or for afternoon tea. But this could be a first, in that I'm going to say Happy Mother's Day, Mum, from your favourite firstborn daughter. First live stream church Happy Mother's Day greeting. So probably not where the service is supposed to be going at this stage, but I just want to get in there, for competitive sake. What I want to do today is just really encourage you and just really start to gather up some of our thoughts and feelings about the state we've been in with lockdown and level 4 and level 3, particularly as tomorrow there will be some announcements about the eventuality of level 2, and particularly too as we start to unwind a bit from the circumstances we found ourselves in and need to start gearing up to the next thing that's coming. So I want to kind of take us through a bit of reflection, as it is really important that we do that, particularly in this transition time. And so I am normally a huge fan of reflection. I really rely on it for myself in big ways and small ways, and I really found that I haven't been able to reflect really well in this lockdown time. I've just had to do the next thing in front of me, and I've just had to panic about groceries or manage something that can't happen but needs to happen, and I haven't been able to think much wider or kind of be reflective on what's going on, because I haven't had the mental space, I think, really for that. And so for me it was a real turning point going into level 3, because the first time I kind of clicked within myself that things will eventually change. I'm very good at doing the thing that's happening at the time, which can be super positive, but can also be really frustrating because I'm not good at lifting my eyes and just thinking beyond what's coming next. So some of you may have been struggling with that as well. I feel like I've been every emotion that you could have possibly been, like the up, down, flat, grumpy, short-tempered, very sleepy. Probably that's maybe nearly all of the 7 dwarfs. I've been a bit dopey. And I found that quite hard, like that's enough kind of to manage myself, let alone managing the people that you're living with. But really since the previous Friday when we'd been in level 3 for that week, I went for a drive, a very short drive, but just so I didn't have to walk up and down my street and look at all my neighbours' houses again when I went out for a walk. But I went to a walk I really like, which is the strip between kind of the end of Bayview and the beginning of West Shore, and you get to look out at the ocean on one side and up into the hills on the other side, and with very reduced fights happening. It was beautifully peaceful. It was packed with people, but I realised how much I'd been yearning for a change of scenery, just to have a little bit of people around as we all navigate our kind of individual bubbles. But just the feeling I had of I can still drive and I can still go somewhere really kind of shook me out of feeling a bit kind of locked in about the lockdown, as it were. It really helped me to kind of step back and start thinking, okay, I need to start thinking about how this is going to be, or how I'm going to navigate my way out of this and embrace a new normal. And so I really want to talk today about the fact as we move forward that we kind of need to look back. Pardon me, that's going to happen a few times. And just we need to really take stock of this strange collective experience that we've been through. I know a lot of you will be thinking, look, that's nice, Charlotte, but that's not me. Or I'm not kind of having the full emotional roller coaster, I'm actually fine. Either way, I think it is really important to reflect. And I think it's really important to look at how we found ourselves coming into lockdown and how we can kind of work our way out. When you fly somewhere, and you'll remember flying, it's in planes and you go regionally, or you can go overseas, but we'll just keep that as a small vision at the moment. When you fly within New Zealand and support domestic tourism, as one day soon we'll be able to, you get routinely warned that you need to be careful when opening the above overhead lockers, because items may have moved or shifted during the flight. And that's a message we get all the time. And so we understand now that when we get off the plane and we slowly open our locker that something could hit us in the head, and we need to be aware that things could have moved around. And it's the same thing for us. We travel, when we're travelling from A to B, there's that movement, but there's also been some internal movement that we may not have been aware of, and we may need to be careful when we've gone from A to B that some things don't come out and hit us on the head. There is movement, so we need to be careful how we exit. And that will be the same thing for us, moving from level 4 to hopefully level 2 this week. That inside of us there will be some change. As much as we've been on a level 4 to level 2 journey, there'll also be some internal things that have changed within us, some unsettling, some adjusting, some different ways of doing things, and we'll need to face those in order to exit well and to have a good exit strategy. So whether you're aware of it or it's a subconscious thing, we have all been affected in different ways, and something may have moved. We need to open our lockers carefully and exit slowly. So when we reflect and take stock, we'll think of some of the things that were great, and there'll be lots of them. We'll think of some of the things we miss, and we'll think of some of the things that were actually not that great, and we're not going to miss it all. And we really want to rush towards the opposite of them and embrace them. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how much I've enjoyed cooking slowly. Because there are no kind of after school pickups and drop-offs and taxiing around to different activities. The day finishes, I finish what I'm doing, I can start cooking, and I can actually take a good 2 hours, and that's been really good for me to actually take that amount of time and to eat late as a family, because then we don't have anything else to rush out to. And I've realised looking back this last week that actually that's something I've really treasured. I didn't know that that was going to be a positive for me, but it has really been a lovely experience not to be rushed in the cooking, not to be producing food, to be wolfed down to race out to something, but just actually to prep the food and to eat together as a family. And I'm just now thinking that's not going to be immediately transferable, because stuff is going to start happening again for the boys, and there's going to be things that we need to go to, but there's something in that I don't want to lose. So that's what's kind of just starting to percolate away at me, is how do I not lose some of the things I've actually treasured. Maybe a lot of us don't need to go back to what we had before and what we used to be like. Maybe there's some things, this is a good transition point to chuck some of that stuff out. I think as much as initially we yearn for that comfort and predictability of how we do things, there's a real opportunity here to rethink and to reimagine and to reevaluate. And part of the Easter story, I found Easter really hard this year, and I talked a bit about that in our Good Friday service, but I think I walked through it more emotionally this year and felt it more strongly, and part of the story really stayed with me, and I was really intrigued by some of the things that happen in this particular part of the story and some of the reasons. I always enjoy the humanity and the familiarity of the disciples. I always enjoy their real, very real kind of responses to Jesus, and often I find they mirror myself, even though I can convince myself I would approach it much better and I'd handle something much better. They speak my thoughts a lot of the time, and I think I felt like we both waded through Easter this year, and I felt that same isolation and that waiting and that pain of not knowing what was going to happen. It really mirrored that level 4 lockdown feeling at that time. I understood differently this year how lost they felt, and I was really struck by how they responded to things after the event, after the crucifixion and after the resurrection, and it really felt like it just paralleled a lot of what we were going through at the time. And I love the way, not just their responses, but how Jesus really met them in that time as well. I love how he restores really directly, and he gives us things to learn about ourselves. And so I want to read this first part of John 21, and to set the scene for you, this is actually recorded as the third, although there are some chronological debates there, Jesus' appearance to this particular group of his disciples. And even with that happening, this third, plus there's been other miracles, plus they've had conversations with other people, they still are back at the Sea of Galilee, sitting around unsure of what to do next, which felt awfully familiar as I read this. And they opt for fishing because they are fishermen. So I would like to read just that first verses 1 to 14 of John 21, where Jesus appears to 7 of his disciples. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some." So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water and headed to the shore. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. "Now come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the 3rd time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. Right, let's unpack some of this as it helps us to get our mind around reflecting. So in the first couple of verses where it talks about the fact that the 7 disciples were there at the Sea of Galilee, and Simon Peter says, "I'm going fishing," and they all agree to go as well. And then it very clearly and simply states, so they all went in the boat and caught nothing all night. Sam mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Simply translated, when Simon Peter says, "I'm going fishing," what he's saying is, let's go back to what we knew. back to what we knew before. Even after everything they had seen and known, they went right back. Let's just do what we need to do. I'm going back, let's all go back. So they go back to doing what they know, for after all they are fishermen by trade, and this is what they know. Fishermen like to fish, they need to fish. We have learnt that in this household. And fishing at night was quite commonplace and quite a productive activity usually. So they go back to the usual, the familiar. I wondered if they were feeling a little defeated, and nothing has changed. And then again they're reminded, because they catch no fish, nothing actually has changed. They're trying to do the next obvious practical step, but they don't really know what to do. So they just go with what they know. And I think in uncertainty we often follow the familiar, the comfortable and the predictable, and there's nothing wrong about that. There's a lot of commentary around this particular part of John 21 where it talks about this decision or lack of decision that Simon Peter makes, and there's some implications that he's gone backwards and has a lack of faith. But what I really like about it is that we know this feeling of if all else fails, just do the thing we've always done, and that yearning. We talked a lot while in lockdown, particularly as we started to face level 3, of the things we wish we could do. We are actually, by our human nature, really drawn to the familiar and to the predictable. And we know that urge to just do something. And this was really familiar for us in the time of the earthquakes, when, particularly because we didn't know about earthquakes. I didn't grow up understanding that Christchurch was going to have earthquakes. We lived in New Brighton on the coast. We were aware of tsunamis, and I think in that very first one on the 4th of September, nearly 10 years ago now, wow, my immediate reaction was, there's going to be a tsunami. There's nothing in my brain that's like, hey, this is an earthquake, this is something local, we need to be responding to this. It was just the importance of getting out of New Brighton. And when we did get somewhere, I opened the boot to look at all the great survival tactics I had employed. I just put in everyone's jacket. So everyone had a wet weather jacket, it wasn't raining. Everyone had a cold jacket, it wasn't particularly cold. Everyone had a jacket that, the jackets that are still on the hook that you haven't kind of passed on to someone and they don't fit you. So everyone had an ill-fitting jacket. So I had accidentally packed about 10 different jackets into the boot of the car and nothing else. I mean, we got skilled at later stages in terms of knowing that you need radio and you need water and you need food and different things, but in that beginning stage it was just I need to do something, and the doing was shove just jackets. Let's have jackets for people in the back of the car. Sometimes actually God's prompt can just be to do the next right thing, just move forward one step at a time. And in the back of my brain, as it's gone a little fuzzy over this time, I thought that was just incredibly wonderful wisdom, to do the next right thing, the thing in front of you. And I thought, oh yeah, I've got that wisdom from the wonderful Jean Tidy. And I thought it's going to be some phenomenal systems theory concept, something from her counselling training, something she's learning. And I said, look, I'd just really love to refer to that in my talk this morning, the Sunday talk. Where did you get that amazing revelation from? I found it so helpful to just think, just do the next right thing. It's actually from the movie Frozen 2. Wonderful revelation from God via the movie Frozen 2 for Jane. But I had taken it on board with such gravity, this wisdom of the importance of doing the next right thing. If you have a small child watching, they may start singing it. It's the beginning of a song. But it has been so important just to put one foot in front of each other at this time. But as the disciples realised, as Simon Peter realised, there wasn't life in that. There wasn't new life in that. They caught nothing. The usual way of doing something, didn't yield anything. And I feel for them that experience of failure and that awareness of we can't rely on what we used to know. There was something in there to be learnt. And we've been there. Simon Peter is not alone in his desire to rush to do something, to make something happen, to put that foot out on the water again. Which brings me to that question for you just now, even as you're thinking, what will you take from this? What will you learn? What will you allow to not be just doing same old, same old? What will be for you the foot that you can put one in front of the other as we come through this process? There's things you need to change. There'll be ways of doing things you need to adopt, definitely ways you need to throw out. There'll be things you want to keep. There'll be things you want to press into. There'll be things that you're fearing, and there'll be things that you'll be needing to grieve. The next lot of verses talks about Jesus standing on the beach at the dawn, but the disciples not recognising him, and him just casually asking if they'd caught anything. I love the way he does that. And then they say no. and he suggests that they should put the net out on the other side, and immediately they do, and immediately they see a result. And I just love that familiar, that kindness in his voice, that where he might have a slight smile on his face and be like, okay lads, catch anything? How's it going out there? In that same kind of kind way of little children. I hear that same voice often myself, like, you're right there, Charlotte, you've got this sorted, have you? That gentle, loving father prompt in my head that God is to me. And I just think, for the record, it's important to know that it's dangerous and maybe too vulnerable to us fishermen about what they have caught and how much of it they have caught. You learn from experience the importance of just asking about the experience. How was the river? How was the weather? Was it just fabulous? Did you see many people? What flies did you use? Numbers come later. But there is Jesus. He sees them, and he sees them right there as his little children, doing what they're doing, making their choices, and he wonders out loud to them, you a bit stuck? Something not working? And he's standing there saying, I'm here, see me, I'm here with you, I'm for you, I'm alongside you. Let's move this thing on. Let's bring life to it. Look to me. Listen to my words. I love that Jesus suggests change, an adjustment in what they're doing to do it differently, something slightly less predictable, some looking at another way kind of experience. Try it this way, he's saying. Do it like this. Do this and you will see things change. I love that he meets them in their nothingness and just their normal actions. He just shows up exactly where they are at, and he does something really fancy, just in an uncomplicated way. Adds a twist. He's not standing over them saying, what are you doing here? Have you not changed? Have you not seen? Have you not realised? He doesn't ask them why they haven't changed. He doesn't get frustrated and say, why can't you learn things? He is grace and kindness, and like Steve shared last week, he is compassion and love. There is life in his words. He is, after all, the way and the truth and the life. In him there is abundance and provision, and there is blessing, and it seems like even the fish know that. So he moves towards them. And I love that he does that for us as well. He sees into our hearts and our circumstances and our motivations and our humanity and our absolute silliness. And he's here with them as he is with us. But he doesn't let us stay there. And this signals the turning point, I think, in this chapter, that as morning breaks and as Jesus is there, he calls them into something. Jesus always brings this beautiful symmetry, shows that there's more to him, there's more in him. And they have been called, and they need to remember that they've been called. So all is not lost, and all can be found again. His invitation is always to life. In the next few verses, there's so many things I'd love to unpack in there about the competitive nature of fishing and of masculinity, and the different ways that John and Simon Peter recognise that it's the Lord, and just Simon Peter's beautiful, clumsy human actions as he struggles to get there and be first. There's so many things I like to go into, but we'll have to say that for another day. Just skipping down to verse 12, Jesus says, now come and have some breakfast. None of the disciples dare to ask, who are you? They know. They knew it was the Lord. Jesus serves them the bread and the fish, and then this is the third time that Jesus has appeared to his disciples. So he makes breakfast for them, and it's his way, I think, of welcoming them in and acknowledging their fellowship and their community. I love that Jesus starts with breakfast. I think he's got a signature dish, the fish and the loaves, but it's him offering. It's an invitation. Always those words come, always the open hands, always standing and waiting. It's a beautiful symmetry of the struggle it has been to catch the fish and get the fish on the shore, and the noise and the recognition. He just meets them where they are at and who they are as men. And he sees them, and there's safety and hospitality in that breakfast, and it's the beginning of the restoration of their relationships, and so much changes from this point. After the section that I read out to you, it's that transitioning into Peter's reinstatement, and there's those questions, those reflective questions, and a kind of open heart surgery that Peter has to go through and be undone and be rebuilt, and Jesus restores him and restores his purpose with gentle grace and truth. It brings that maturity and that wholeness, and then the great adventure begins. So for us, I think it's really important to know that this is Peter, the rock on which we built the church. Peter, even he, after physically seeing the Lord and after knowing that he'd been resurrected, even he returned to what he knew. Even he acted like nothing had changed, and even he, despite being really in those actual events that we read about, reverted to what he once knew. So despite his best heroics and his excellent emotional statements everywhere, it turns out that deep down he's just the guy. He's just Simon, facing uncertainty, clinging to the comfortable. And I want to make it really clear, this was not a bad move. This was just a real human move. And Jesus saw him anyway. Jesus inserted him into his story and saw him anyway, and he comes near to him. And Jesus brought life to him, an invitation to him. And the same he does for us. He calls us to life. He calls us to more and comes running to us and extends grace. He doesn't say, well, that's dumb. He says, come on, put your net on the other side. And there's life in me. He meets us where we are and he moves us forward and brings that growth. And whatever experience you've had after these 7 weeks, I think, just position yourself well going forward. Take this invitation created by the super unusual and challenging times that we found ourselves in, and let's start to look a bit beyond the surface and face some of the things that have been going on for us. So what's next for you? Where will you go from here? What will you take with you? What will you learn and what will you leave behind? What I want to land on is bringing us to a point where we understand this has been a season of grief, and from actual physical grief, but maybe the grief of loss of work or income or relationships, just the ability to hang out with our friends, our community, loss of routine, loss of sanity maybe even, loss of your plans and your dreams, loss of just actual appointments and holidays and normal stuff. And we all grieve in different ways. Luke is an active relaxer. He does stuff and he's really seized this opportunity, and I've been amazed about how much he's just embraced this and used this time well, whereas I've felt so opposite to that. I felt overwhelmed by it and I've craved routine and I've fought against it, and it's taken me a lot harder to embrace the circumstances. So everyone copes with the weight of this season differently, and I think we can often feel sluggish and tired and not produce anything, right through the continuum to people that have suddenly fought the difficulty of it and produced amazing things at the end of it. Some of us are still angry. Maybe you're angry even at God or at the decisions of our politicians or at other people, and some of you might just still feel quite saddened by all of this. But many of us, and just to use John Mark Comer's words, because he's been taking his church through the same process, we are unacquainted with grief. We may not even recognise its various faces, but it's in the air nonetheless. And Paul wrote, do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. There's something for us as Christians. We can grieve and we have hope. It's both. And John Mark Comer has been taking his church through various practices, and he was interviewed about what he recommended people do. And we know him as someone that has developed lots of formation practices and disciplines, and we've borrowed a lot of his resources for our home church. But he said really clearly that is not the thing that's going to work best in this time. It's so hard to make plans in all these transitions. The most important thing is to grieve, and it is to dream. And that's really similar to what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. Do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. We can grieve and have hope. And we need to grieve and acknowledge that there's something there to grieve, but we can grieve with hope because we know our future is good and it's based on God's character and God's promises. And as followers of Jesus, we don't need to deny the pain and the suffering, but we can grieve that, confident in the hope of Jesus and his presence right now at the moment and how he can work in our lives. What I was really looking for was a really simple coat hanger as such, some kind of strategy to hang this all on so that we can put this idea into something more concrete. And there's an amazing technique that Ronald Rolheiser has used, and it's really something that will anchor this process for us, because there's not really a template. There's some great wisdom, but there's not a template for, okay, so what does that look like? And Ronald Rolheiser put a lot of work into personalizing something called the Paschal cycle, which is a Catholic tradition. And the Paschal time is Easter and Passover, and there's a real cycle that they go through, kind of a 5-stage emotional process for grieving and hoping, and it's part of their church calendar. So the cycle includes these 5 stages. There is Good Friday, where you name your deaths, your areas of grief and loss, and then we move through Easter and claim your birth. So what are the areas of hope in your life that you may have seen? Then there are the 40 days after Easter, which incidentally we find ourselves in now, where we grieve what we've lost and we adjust to the new reality that's in front of us. And then following that time there was the Ascension, and that translates to not clinging to the old but letting it ascend, giving it the chance to ascend, and then letting that bless you. And finally Pentecost, accepting the spirit of the life that you are in fact living right now. So those 5 stages obviously connect a lot to the Easter story in that particular time, and he talks about a lot in his book, which I shall do a plug for, which Bay Vineyard owns, and it's just fantastic. This is The Holy Longing. He talks about the fact that there's many deaths that we go through. We die to lots of things throughout our lifetime. The death of ideals, our view of God, the death of our youth and facing up to that, the death of dreams we might have that we know are not going to come to pass. There are small deaths and big deaths, but they all have the capability to transform us, and if processed well, to actually really transform our lives and bring new life to us now. And he makes that distinction between terminal death, which ends life and possibility, and the Pascal type of death, which opens us up to a deeper and richer experience. But to do that we have to face things, and we have to mourn things, and we have to let go of things. So that Pascal mystery that he talks about, Rolheiser talks about, is the mystery of how somehow through death there is new life that we can receive. And if we make peace with things and embrace things, we can kind of produce more life in our lives. We know that Jesus exemplified this himself. He is this process. John 12:24 says, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So Jesus showed us this process in his death and resurrection, and we're perfectly placed right at this time to look at these 5 stages to help you make a bit more sense of this process and make it a bit more real for us, so that it's not feeling quite as mystical. There are questions that you can ask yourself around this and things that you can journal. So these 5 points become things that you can think through and reflect on and kind of answer the question to. When John Mark Comer was talking about applying this to his church, he suggested that people actually just even use pen and paper, not devices, because there was something about the importance of getting out these thoughts for yourself. I have been working through just your good old standard 1B5 and really just scribbling my thoughts down as they come, trying not to make it pretty, but trying to write things down. And that's how I started thinking about the fact that I've really enjoyed some slowness in our life and starting to draw some little ideas about what that could look like. So the questions, just to make it a little simpler for you, because this is something we'd love you to do. We'd love you to start and to come back to. It might not all flow. It might take a long time. You might latch onto those deaths, those things we've lost much quicker, and then it might take a while to work out how to adjust to some of these things. But the Good Friday part, the question for ourselves is that, where am I experiencing grief and loss right now? So this is big, small, insignificant, mild, whatever it is. So for me, my planning, I rely on planning my life, and I took a long time to remove things from my calendar over this last 7 weeks because there's something of that I didn't want to let go on. So that is a loss for me. I've lost my plans. I'd planned out a holiday for us. I planned out a big break for us. We had Joel's friend arriving from Christchurch. That's a loss. I was due to fly down to Christchurch. There's been some, they're smallish things, but they're enough to feel that there has been a period of loss and of grief. The next part was the Easter part, and the question for that is, what are the areas of hope and new life in my life? What are new things that have come about because of this? And for me, I really need to acknowledge that I've learned a little bit more about technology, and that has been exciting. I've been a bit more vulnerable, straight up with people. I think I've loved the way our Bay Kids whānau page has become much more interactive, and those things have been really important for my Bay Kids community. I've really enjoyed an insight into how my sons learn and to what their schooling looks like for them, and to be part of that process with them. The next part is that 40 days part. 40 days, so there's a long period of time given to grieving. So don't think, great, I'm going to grieve, sort that out, ready for Monday. Whatever Jacinda says, you will need some time. What do I need to grieve, and how do I need to adjust to the changes in my life? This is the part I'm thinking about next. There will be changes we need to make as we embrace our new normal, things that we want to keep, that we've actually learnt about ourselves in lockdown. I'm giving myself a bit of time to that, to how we re-enter, how my exit strategy is going to look like. And then we look at the ascension. The question for you there is, what am I still clinging to from the past? How can I let it go and receive the blessing from it? It's really important through an emotionally healthy spirituality lens that we look at our past and acknowledge how much it affects our present, but also realize that whether we look at it or not, it's going to come out in some way. And so there will be some things that you need to let go of from this time and receive the blessing from what they were. Part of that has been the slowing down. There's been a real blessing in that because of the things we had to let go of. Part of that is the understanding that we are not in control, and that there are some priorities we have prioritized that were not the right ones. They didn't matter, and there will be a letting go of some of that stuff and just allowing it to bless you. The loss of things can be a blessing. And finally, the question from Pentecost, which is, where can I find the Spirit of God in my reality for my current life right now? Like Sam mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the WWJSTY, I hope I've got that right. What would Jesus say to you? What is happening right now? Where can I find what God is doing in my life right now? And how can I just love what it looks like in all the chaos right now? We have a really open plan in our small kind of living, dining, kitchen space is all really open, which was the trend to take down walls and do things. We have learned that we might need some walls to give ourselves space from each other and to make our household work. And I find that when I think about that question, it's just that understanding that that's okay, that our family is in a different phase and I need to adjust to that and move with it, and that's okay. So we're going to put up a template with those questions, and I'd love you to just write them down and in your own time just start attacking them either one by one, whatever ones come to you, but give yourself time and start thinking, wow, that was fast. We went into level 4 fast, we stayed there for a while, we're in level 3 now, we're very likely to go into level 2 maybe this week, and there's things that you might need to just take a step back from and think, wow, there's been some changes in our family and I don't want to lose something from that change, and I don't want to miss something, but there may be things that you think, yes, and I'll be very grateful to move on from that particular change. We'd love you to reflect and to use this time and to create your exit strategy. We're going to play for you at the end of this my talking the song The Blessing. We were so moved by the song, as I know a lot of you were. Just the beautiful way that the churches across the United Kingdom had taken this song and really prayed it as a blessing over all of the United Kingdom. That lovely way that so many churches, I think 60 to 70 churches, came together around one thing. And it was just it's a touching song anyway, but this particular version is really touching because it is showing unity amongst the churches and just speaking some beautiful words over the people and the families in the United Kingdom. We want to just leave you with that as a blessing, that He is with you and He is for you. And as we prepare for an announcement tomorrow, I know that every time these announcements have come, they've raised some anxiety within us. It may or may not signal the beginning of level 2 and the beginning of life coming back. But either way, we need to prepare ourselves. So do take a moment to reflect and to grieve as we transition. Do take a moment to evaluate and look for change. But remember, Jesus is in that. He came to Peter, even though Peter was back at his fishing, back doing what he was doing, seeing no life in it. Jesus was there. He doesn't condemn us for being attracted to, drawn to the comfort and the predictable. He doesn't condemn us for going back to what we know, but He draws us to Himself and to life. There's also prayer available after our time of service. We would love to pray for you. I really feel this morning that I'd love people to receive prayer if they just need that courage and that peace to reflect, to get themselves into that mindset where they can face the things they grieve and look at what it means for them. I love to pray for people too that are feeling condemned by what they've gone back and done, and that comfort and predictability, and just that I never would want people to feel that Jesus says, well, that was done, and walks away. I think what we learn from John 21 is He is there, and what Steve Graham shared last week is He is a God of compassion and a God of love, and He wants to bring us to life. So if you need prayer for that or for anything else, do make use of that. And I'd just like to finish with the words of the blessing, and you will hear it very soon. The Lord bless you and keep you. make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Bless you, Bay Vineyard. Can't wait till we can see each other again. Hang in there, reflect well, be careful that during the flight the luggage in the overhead locker may have moved slightly, so be gentle on yourself as we come into land and as you carefully reflect and look back on this time.